ETF investing is a great way to earn a consistent stream of income in the stock market. In New Zealand, there's lots of different ETF options to choose from, but which one is ultimately going to make you the most money? Throughout this video, I'll be showing you my top 3 New Zealand ETFs and an exact step-by-step guide of how to buy into them using the New Zealand brokerage platform Sharesies. I'll also be discussing the pros and cons of ETF investing so that you can make an informed decision on whether or not it's the type of investing that you want to do. What is an ETF? Essentially, an ETF is just a collection of different companies clumped together into one investment based on a particular goal of that ETF. As an example, you have ETFs that will track the overall performance of a country's stock market, like the NZ Top 50, S&P 500, or the ASX 200. The NZ Top 50 is just a collection of New Zealand's 50 largest companies all put together into one investment. You can get ETFs that specifically target dividend yielding companies or different sectors or commodities in the market, like gold or healthcare. They offer wide diversification amongst multiple different companies with one single investment. If you're trying to buy into the S&P 500, you're going to get targeted exposure to companies like Facebook, Google, Tesla, and Amazon. One share of Amazon is close to $3,000, but one share of VOO is about $400. You're still going to get a part of all of those different companies, albeit at a very minimal amount. You're essentially getting a small slither of the overall stock market when you're buying into this investment, and you're going to have your money spread out amongst some of the largest companies in the world. It's quite a cheap way to get diversification in your portfolio and really cuts down on brokerage fees as well. The main limitation of ETFs is that they don't grow very quickly. You get a very slow and consistent return, but you're not exposed to the massive price changes that can come with more volatile investments like cryptocurrency or growth stocks such as Square and Tesla. This can deter people from investing into ETFs because at the end of the day, when people invest in the stock market, they want to make money as fast as possible, ideally, and as safely as possible. And some people may view ETFs as an investment vehicle that's not going to help them achieve this goal. The first ETF on this list is the SmartShares NZ Top 50 ETF. Essentially, the goal of this investment is to mimic the performance of the NZX Top 50, which is just the 50 largest publicly traded companies in New Zealand. If you put the two stock graphs side by side, you can see that their performance is identical and they have exactly the same percentage increases year by year. Some of the top 10 companies in this ETF include Mainfreight, Meridian Energy, and Contact. The top 10 businesses make up roughly 50% of this ETF, and it gives you wide diversification amongst multiple different sectors in the New Zealand market. From healthcare to construction to energy, there's lots of different places that your money will be put into. Over the past 5 years, this ETF has gone up over 41%, meaning that if you had invested $10,000 5 years ago, your portfolio would be worth $14,147. The fees for this ETF are also quite low at 0.5%, meaning that if you had invested $10,000, you would pay $50 in fees, making it also quite a cheap way to invest in the New Zealand stock market. It also provides a dividend of 2.4%. Not the highest dividend payout that you can get, but most definitely it is a good representation that the ETF has a lot of spare money that it can afford to pay out this dividend to its investors. The second ETF on this list is the SmartShares NZX Top 10 ETF, and this is just a collection of the top 10 largest companies in New Zealand. It mimics the NZX Top 10 index, and if you put the stock graphs side by side, the index and the ETF have exactly the same price movements. This ETF also provides a dividend of 1.65%, which is not as high as the NZ Top 50 ETF, but it's still nice to have. The top 10 holdings for this ETF include Fletcher, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare, and Spark. There's far less diversification in this ETF as it's only comprised of 10 different companies. 33% of the ETF's total holdings are held within the top 3 companies. This means your return can be a bit more inconsistent. Over the past 5 years, this ETF has gone up just over 34%, meaning that if you had invested $10,000 5 years ago, your portfolio would be worth $13,454. The management fee is also very respectable at 0.6%, meaning that if you had invested $10,000, you would pay $60 in fees. Again, it's also a cheap option to get targeted exposure to the New Zealand market in a cheap way. The third ETF on this list is the Smart Shares NZ Dividend ETF. It's comprised of 25 different companies in the New Zealand stock market that focus heavily on paying out a high dividend. The companies in this ETF focus primarily on electricity and are comprised of companies like Genesis, Contact and Meridian. The top 3 companies make up 30% of this ETF. This ETF has a dividend payout of 3.16%, making it the highest on this list. Over the past 5 years, this ETF has gone up 12.54%, meaning that if you had invested $10,000 5 years ago, your portfolio would be worth $12,540. Keeping in mind with dividend yielding ETFs that you have to make sure that they are always profitable and you're not getting caught in a dividend trap. And this is where an ETF or a stock will have a high dividend payout, but its stock price will be consistently falling in value, meaning that no matter how high the dividend is, even if it's 8 or 10%, if the stock price keeps falling, you're actually going to be losing money instead of making a profit. So always keep that in mind. How good is the financial health of the investment, and are they just using a dividend to lure in unsavvy investors to put their money into the stock or ETF? Now that you're familiar with some very popular New Zealand ETFs, how would you actually go about putting your money into them? I'll be giving you a complete guide using the website Sharesies so you can actually start buying some of these ETFs yourself. Once you're actually on Sharesies, this is what the home screen looks like. From here, you're going to click on Invest in the left-hand corner of the screen, and then up the top here, you can search for investments. You can see over here next to companies is ETFs, and you can click on that as well, or you can just search directly for the type of ETF that you're after. So click on search, and then you'll see a lot of American companies pop up as well. This is because Sharesies supports the New Zealand, American and Australian stock market, so it's best to search specifically for what you're actually looking for. If we want to invest in the NZ Top 10 ETF, we can just type in NZ Top 10 up the top, and you can see the Smart Shares ETF pop up right here. So just click on that. From here you can see a stock graph that outlines the price movements of this ETF over different time periods, say 1 week, 3 months, 1 year, and even 5 years as well, to give you a good idea of the price performance that this investment has had. So once you're happy with the ETF that you've selected, then you just want to click on buy, and then it's going to give you a few different purchasing options from here. So the best thing that I like to go with is market buy, and that's just buying the shares at the set price. So if we go back to the ETF, you can see it's roughly $1.90 per share, and then when you hit market buy, you're just buying the shares of that ETF at that set price. A limit buy order is where you set the price that you would like to pay. So if you think that the ETF is going to increase in value, potentially go up to $2, then you can select limit buy. Then when you click on your limit buy order, you can type in the amount that you're willing to pay. Say if you thought it was going to go up to $2. I'm just going to stick with market buy and set how much I would like to invest. So say I wanted to put in $80, I'll just pop that in here, press review, and then my shares will be purchased for me. So those are all the steps involved in actually purchasing an ETF using the broker Sharesies. This is by far the easiest way to invest in the New Zealand stock market. The only competitor is ASB Securities, and it's far more complicated and not as cheap as well. If you want a more step-by-step breakdown of how to actually use the Sharesies platform, all the way from setting up an account to making your first investment, then check out this video on screen to give you a complete guide on the Sharesies platform.